Hello, fact staff. Today we'll be talking a bit about how to build travel and community-based work. As you know, the majority of work being done at FACS is work in the home and community, and so travel can sometimes be a confusing issue for many therapists, particularly new therapists, to know how to do accurately. This little tutorial will be hopefully an aid to help you overall in being able to do that. First thing to be aware of is that for all medical assistance, or which is known as MA, or prepaid medical assistance plans, or PMAPs, the the travel is billed in minutes, not miles, and that's using that H0046 code. Now keep that in mind when billing, and just realize that this code is really time-based, and because of that, if you experience significant delays or weather-based delays, for instance, or construction, you can include that time that caused you delays getting to the client's home as part of your overall time. But remember, it must be documented in the case note, the reason for the travel delay. So the H0046 is always used with some other billable code. Usually these are therapy codes like the 90834 or 90791. And travel is only billed once a day. So if you're seeing a client multiple times a day, make sure you're adding all that billing together. And in particularly note when you're billing an extended diagnostic assessment. Extended diagnostic assessments usually have 3 sessions that are part of that extended diagnostic assessment. And so when you actually bill that diagnostic assessment, you will bill all 3 sessions that you had and the travel related to that at the same time. Here's an example. This is a screenshot from a case note. And within that, you note that there is very specific time that is entered on the case note, and there is a reason for that. It is required by statute. So you notice in the upper quadrant, the session time was when the therapist was actually meeting with the family. And below that, the travel section, you have travel to and travel from the client. Now we'll talk in just a minute when you would bill either time to or from a client, or both if you're seeing them. But in this case, assume we are traveling both the to and from. And notice that it is specific to time, and it's not some rounded up notion like 9:45 to 10 o'clock or 11:15 to 11:45. You need to have the actual time in minutes, and then note the total number is under total travel time. I believe that automatically calculates when you put that travel time in. And just make sure you note AM and PM on your travel time. We're going to go now to what this looks like when you're actually billing within Procentive. Now notice I have a client picked out, obviously fictitious workflow client, but under that we have travel time, the H0046 code. Now if you notice the previous slide, we had travel both before and after. There's not a way to document before and after in a travel note with the start and end time because there's only one of those available. So I put the total time on that I billed, which is 50 minutes if you remember. And then notice below this my actual mileage I put in this box here. So it's 32 miles, took me 50 minutes to travel. And that is what I use in order to bill the travel for that particular session. Now, here's what you need to know that the H0046 cannot be billed for. It can't be billed for transporting clients, although I will say there are some county contracts that would allow for that. If you are transporting a client to a session in order to have a session, that can still be billed as travel because you're still going from, for instance, if you're meeting with a child, you then went to a restaurant to have fast food restaurant to have a conversation and then drove him back. You can include that travel. Just make sure you note in your case note that the client was with you during that time, but it is not billed as a client session. You can't bill it if it's already part of an expectation that a client goes to a certain site, like in day treatment. If you're providing travel that's embedded in certain codes already, this is fairly rare. We have an H2033 code, and we also have some codes that Medica pays. I'm forgetting them off the top of my head, but it's fairly rare, and we don't really bill those too much anymore. So if you're confused about that, ask your supervisor. Can I bill for a no-show? If you go to a client's home, for instance, they're on MA and they are a no-show, you would have to bill that as a non-billable travel to fax for that. And we'll talk about that code in just a minute. And you can't bill travel to almost all commercial insurance policies. They just don't pay for that. They assume that all services are going to be occurring in the office. Some of these things I mentioned already in terms of the documentation. You must have actual start and stop times. This is all from statute here. The name of the recipient, which obviously is embedded in your case note, the date services, the date the entry is made is actually when you sign your case note. The date of service provided is within the case note itself. Origin site and destination site, that is just implicit in your schedule. Who provided the service? Again, if you're signing your case note, that would be you. And then an electronic source used to calculate these distances and times. Now, I would strongly recommend that you use Google Maps Location Finder. Now, aside from the Big Brother is watching piece, if you turn on your location finder within Google Maps, it will track your time and your miles between clients. It's a wonderful tool. There are also apps that can also do this. I haven't used any of those, so I can't vouch for that. But Google Maps Location Finder is a wonderful tool to know how many miles and the actual times you use to drive from location to location. Strongly recommend it. I don't have any screenshots for this, but please ask myself or your supervisor and they can give you let you see what that looks like, and it's relatively easy to do and it is super helpful. Strongly recommend it. And then obviously you have to justify that travel is needed to deliver services, and that's usually done in your DA. And there's boxes right near the end of the DA that just said services will be provided in multiple environments or travel is required. Just click those boxes and you got that piece covered. So this is a little reminder about what you can count and not count towards travel. So if you're starting your day from your home, here's what medical assistance says. Again, this is directly language from their website about what they will pay. So if you're going to your first client, they say they will pay either the lesser of the following: the distance between the provider's home and the recipient, or the distance between the provider's usual place of business or office and the recipient. So in this example, if you started your day and the distance between the office and your client was 10 miles, but the distance between your home and the client was 15 miles, you would only be able to bill 10 miles for that first trip to your client. The reason for this is that travel, at least from a federal government standpoint, you can't count travel that is considered part of your commute. I know that sounds a little funky, but just you'll have to, this is the world we live in and you have to live with this. And so that's why typically if you start at the office, you can't include the time you spent traveling from home to the office because that's considered part of your commute. Here's a little more detailed, let's say, day, so to speak, of a therapist and what they can bill as part of that. And you notice if you start, let's say, at the fax office and go to your first client, the travel to your first client is billed to the first client. And then if you're traveling to the second client, the time between the first client and the second client goes to the second client. The same is true from the second to the third. And here, as you end your day, if you go back to the office, you can include that time as part of your last client of the day. If you don't return home, you can't include that travel as part of billing to medical assistants or PMAP. And that's because, again, that notion that you are commuting then from the client at the end of your day back to the home. So please don't do that. If you do that, it's considered fraud and could be caught in an audit, and just don't do it. It's not worth it. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't deduct that mileage if you're not being reimbursed for it. That's always a possibility. So the only exception to this is when therapists are traveling long distances, like for instance when therapists go to Girard as part of expected service delivery. The last piece of this is when is billing not billable to a MA or PMAP. And in situations like that, always look to see if grant or county funded options are available to bill insurance. This helps cover the services financially and create less of a burden on the agency. If you can't bill to a grant or county contract, you can use non-billable travel time. Again, if you just, every program has a non-billable travel time, and just enter, like for instance, if you're an outpatient, just enter OP and tab in the actual code box area and you'll see a list of codes and pick the non-OPNB travel time code. Usually in these situations, time and miles are billed as separate codes because county contracts pay in miles, not time. So just be aware that it may be a different funder for that, and you may have to put two separate entries for billing travel. But all the same applies. You need to have actual clock time. County entities do audit these on occasion, and we have had actually to refund money when data has not been clear. So please be as clear as possible on your case notes. That's really where the auditing entity will look for the most accurate information. And then obviously document any travel with client in your vehicle. Some counties do pay a higher rate for that if you're doing that. I know Hennepin does, but just be aware of that. Well, again, I hope this little tutorial was helpful in helping you better understand how to bill travel. If you have further questions, please see myself or your supervisor for further clarification. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next training.